we have a chance to redesign the industry that builds America. Like, we can build better, faster, safer. And I've seen it across the last 25 years, and I'm even more excited about what could happen across the next 25 years.
Welcome to Builders, Budgets, and Beers. I'm Reece Barnes, and I started this podcast to have real conversations about money in the building industry, the wins, the mistakes, and everything in between. I believe builders deserve to feel confident about their finances, and that starts by hearing from others who've been through it too. This industry can be slow to change, but the right stories and the right tools can make profitability feel possible. Let's get into it. Alrighty, Dex, mics are hot. We're ready to go. Thank you so much for jumping on Builders, Budgets, and Beers, sir.
No, it's great to be here. Really excited to chat. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the construction industry and a lot for us to talk about.
1000%. And I'm super stoked to have you on the podcast, just with your background in construction tech, from the sales lens. I mean, you've been talking to contractors for how many years?
I've been in construction tech for over 25 years. So it's been a great industry to be part of. I mean, I love construction tech. I love working with contractors, architects, engineers. Across that 25 years, we've seen so much disruption and transformation with different technology, different project types. And then, people are great. Like you and I talked before, that just the, really great people in the construction industry. I don't think I could, work in banking or biotech or something like that. I just love the kind of relationships that you build in the construction industry.
Totally. Dex, we're salt of the earth people. We like, the white collar that come from blue collar, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I totally agree. I mean, there's certainly a passion that becomes developed when you work with these people. And honestly, like, just out of my experience, you find that they can be a bit reserved. They can be skeptics. But once you really do start to show and prove your value and your understanding of their world, they are excellent people to work with. Okay, cool. And just as a background, okay, so for the guests, we have Dexter Bachelder in the seat. You gave a little background here, Dexter, but what are you up to these days?
Yeah, I just started a new role, head of sales at Speckle, and just joined this week, and really excited about the opportunity to take kind of BIM data and really drive decisions, automate workflows on a project or a portfolio level with that data. So that's a really exciting space. So
Totally. And I think we can get into that a little bit, but just to, stay on track here, I like to ask guests one question to kind of drive a little bit of where this episode goes. And with your, over 25 years of experience in construction tech, in your opinion, what is the one conversation that needs to be had in construction that isn't being had enough?
Yeah, I think it's my kind of theme for this answer is around the shortage of labor in the construction industry. I know the industry needs about 500,000 people, to keep up with the current pace of work. That doesn't even include, growth of the industry. And I think it's across the whole, ecosystem of the construction industry. Everyone from, plumbers, architect,
electricians. That's the big one.
Contractors, architects, builders. If we're really going to grow the industry, we have to either find more people or really talk about how technology can augment that. So robots have been talked about for a little while, but I mean, I legitimately think we need, robots on construction sites putting up drywall, just because I don't think we'll have enough people to, keep pace with the industry. And we're seeing that, very topical is with data centers. Data centers are struggling to find, MEP people out in, really remote places to try to keep those projects going. And if we don't have enough people, we can't do the projects. And so, or we have to find these alternative solutions with technology and automation and things like that.
Totally. And I think, like, you're obviously, over at Speckle, talking about automating workflows, specifically around like BIM data. Obviously, over at Adaptive, we're talking about automating workflows for back office tasks. And there's still like this giant gorilla in the room of, to your point, right? 500,000 needed slots for the construction industry just for what we need. That's not anticipating future growth. And it's an extremely sensitive topic, right? Because when like you're talking about automating workflows, people immediately are like, well, what am I going to do? Right. And specifically, a lot of the trades, the conversation over, call it, the last couple years, where AI is like really, come into its own and been much more applicable than it has in the future, is that like you can't replace the field with, or the trades rather, with technology or robots, as you had put it. I mean, my personal take on this is you have to remove the emotion from the reality of the situation, which is we need 500,000 people. Right.
Yeah.
We like, there's like, that's like, jobs being automated or not is beside the point. The reality of it is we're short what we need. So even just like digging in on, you mentioned robots with like drywall, right? And this, what do you think is like the reality of us getting technology to do an adequate, if not advanced, job in these trades?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a challenge, and I don't know if robots are going to solve the problem over the next kind of
Yeah.
12 or 18 months. And AI can automate a lot of processes. I think that there's always enough work to do on a project site,
Yeah.
that if there's more than enough work for, if someone automates one part of somebody's job, they can go off and do something else, or they can work on two projects. And so
Yeah.
I think we just need that excess kind of capacity, and leveraging the tools to kind of also get people home at night, like, and get home safely at night, and instead of staying on the site until 8 o'clock at night going through logs or something like that. Let's let the tools do some of those things and improve the quality of life and the safety of people out in the field.
Totally. And like, I even just like personally, like I've got a family member who I was talking to him on Sunday, and they have a huge construction project going on, and all the project management team and the superintendent team, they're doing shifts over weekends just to like keep eyes on projects and people doing what they need to. So like the need is certainly there, but I think the industry is still, skeptical, as I'd mentioned earlier, of like, what is the validity of this actually happening, right? So I maybe, like, from your point of view, how do you think about, or how would you advise contractors to think about finding areas that they could apply technology, whether that's an AI solution or robotics with AI, right? How would you urge them, or how do you think about applicable places to start automating these workflows?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'd like to cover too is that I think we need to be in tech enabled industry to
Mhm.
attract new workers to the industry. If we have
Yes, good
AI,
point.
if we have tools, we have iPads, we have apps, we have 3D models, we can attract more people, to leave other industries to come into the construction industry, to be in a tech enabled kind of industry. So I think that's one area that a lot of companies need to do, is kind of show some like cool, innovative technology to I don't know, teenagers like games, and a 3D
Totally.
model is not 100% different than a game, or some of those kinds of things. So let's use the technology to also be more efficient, but also attract people into the industry. I think
Totally.
to go back to your question, I think you could look at where do good research across all the kinds of different solutions. And when I started 25 years ago, there were a handful of companies, and now we have hundreds or thousands of kind of point solutions. But where's the real pain? Where are the delays? Where are people struggling? Where are the bottlenecks? What's taking longer than it should? I think those are the kind of areas that you got to start to identify. And people have innovation teams and technology teams, and but I still really feel like it's the people on the front lines that need the tools and have the pain, and finding solutions to their pain is kind of I think that's how we get more adoption and usage, and that's how we kind of start. So, and I've never seen
Totally.
a technology rolled out where if you didn't have the people in the front line embracing it, it won't be successful. And you want Joe on one project to say, oh, to Mark on another project, hey, we're using this tool and it's been awesome. It's, saved me 5 hours a week, and those are the kinds of things that you need to drive adoption.
Totally. Okay. Well, and so I think your point with like being able to attract talent by becoming and continuing to lean into, which I do think the construction vertical has been doing a great job of over the last, call it 5 years, but really becoming like a forward thinking tech enabled industry. I definitely think that's a solid point. We'll tie into that. But even in your perspective, because you nailed it, right? If the front lines, if they're not adopting the solution, they're probably not seeing the value. If they're not seeing the value, then the solution's not going to stick. Right. But you also had mentioned like going in and evaluating what are the workflows, what are the processes, what are the areas for improvement that we could start applying solutions to. And just from my own point of view, being on the software solution side, is like that is really easy for someone like me to say, especially when we're focused on construction accounting or Speckle is focused on BIM data, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really easy for us to understand, we'll just focus on these internal processes and then start evaluating products from there. But is there any more depth that you could advise a construction company to start? Like, what are some like tactical, like 1 or 2 steps that they could start with in terms of importance to be like, okay, operations from this standpoint, that's good to go. Back office is bleeding. Maybe we need to like look at these triggers and evaluate these processes. Like, how would you urge, biased aside, contractors to start really looking at their processes internally and then become decisive on what's the most important workflow to start automating?
Something that I've seen a lot over the last 25 years
Yeah.
is that where you've had two champions on either rolling out a technology or a project, you kind of have maybe and it doesn't have to be, but maybe a younger person that's kind of really tech friendly, and then you have a maybe a more experienced kind of professional, and if you kind of tag those two people up, they end up finding some really interesting solutions and using technology, and sometimes it's technology that wasn't built for that purpose, but they found
Right.
a hack, or they found a way of really solving a problem by looking at what's out there in terms of the possibility of technology, and what's someone that has a lot of kind of subject matter expertise, and putting those two together. And sometimes that's vendor supplier kind of relationships, but often it's not. It's like internal researchers working together to kind of find those things. What are the real bottlenecks? What are the real pains that are out there? So I think
Totally.
construction, back in the early 2000s, we used to go off and sell to and market to projects.
Yeah.
And so the project director would decide whether he was going to roll out a piece of software. That wasn't sustainable, and you'd have these tool sets with hundreds of thousands of point solutions, and
Yeah.
so people got control of it, and they kind of started the innovation teams, and I think a lot of that is really positive. But I still think it's kind of getting out to the people in the front line, and like for you, if it's the finance department, or for me, for it's VDC or somebody like that, then we kind of got to get out there and find out what the real bottlenecks are.
Totally. Well, and I think that's like extremely tactical. And even just for our audience, I mean, we've got contractors doing 5 million in top line. We've got people that are doing, 500 million. Right. So it's like, but I think the two champions is like a really tactical piece of advice, especially for like maybe a business owner that's listening to this, or someone who's wanting to scale. And they're like, we've tried the solutions, we've looked at them, they've never really stuck, is like lean into hiring the young people, which we'll get into a little bit more. How do we attract young people?
Yeah.
Right, from outside of industries? It's like lean into being like, we are a tech forward construction company, right? But then the second piece is don't, like, the young person, maybe not even with like construction background or like a ton of experience, have them come in through the fresh lens, evaluating the processes and looking how people are actually executing, and then pair that up with an experienced person who knows the inside and out why people are doing things the way that they are, to then start saying, here are the highest yielding areas that we could start applying AI into our business to keep us more lean, to then potentially prevent or fill the gap of the 500,000 people that we need to bring into the industry.
I think that's right.
So,
I mean, also just giving tools like ChatGPT, Claude, like I know credits and tokens and all that can get expensive,
yeah.
but I think you have to give those tools out to the enterprise and let them play around with those kinds of things to find the where they're, it might start with one little thing and that might bubble up to being a really good kind of solution across the whole enterprise.
Totally, totally. Well, and I think even from that standpoint of like, again, going back into like, we have this like severe labor shortage in the industry. Like, I look at a chat GPT or Claude at this point being more or less table stakes, right? Like if your company's not leveraging these types of tools, like you're just organically going to be behind. But even just some more tactical pieces, and again, you might not have this. Maybe I'm curious if you do. But like, what have you seen construction companies do in terms of giving their teams the autonomy that have been really successful? Is it a budget? Is it like a path to go down? Like, how do you see these companies really directing their team to say, go out and find something, and we're going to give you X amount of money, or we want to pilot X number of tools, or what would you say that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about it. We have a lot of the big kind of GCs. Your ENR top 400 have
Yep.
set up innovation teams or digital experts or chief digital officer, and I think they're going out and trying to understand the requirements of their teams and then going out to the market to find reasonable solutions. And I think they've kind of come up with, that's a pretty good process. But I'm really interested in, and I saw it a little bit in the early days where we had kind of document controllers, right? They were the clerks and managing the drawings.
Yep.
And then they became kind of project information managers, PIMs. So they were kind of got into the tool sets and the tools and the information more than just. So we saw kind of an evolution there. And I know like Suffolk in Boston is putting AI engineers onto projects.
Yeah.
And maybe we have to find new jobs and new roles on projects to kind of help automate those processes. And maybe that's one way of being on the front line and identifying those kind of bottlenecks is you have the experts on site on projects.
Totally. We see that all the time. Is like we could sell into like a chief information officer, right? But the odds of them knowing a financial and accounting workflow to the level that they need to really validate if this is going to be a relevant solution or not is challenging. So like, is this a simple, call it like a $50 million or $100 million a year contractor? Is this as simple as like going out and finding, a young person that's extremely tech forward with a background in whatever their operations call it, to come in and then just say, you're going to be boots on the ground with these guys, evaluating, asking questions, doing these things for 6-12 months until you understand the problems and the process intimately? Or what do you see?
I think so. I mean, I think that's been done a lot. Like some of the most successful implementations I've been part of, where maybe they didn't have that defined role, but there was kind of this young change agent who, also had muddy boots and who kind of, was a little ambitious, wanted to bring something new to the company. And they were often the kind of first people that we would engage in. And then they would go back to their project teams and help kind of roll it out. And, maybe it wasn't defined as an AI engineer in the field, but those are the guys that kind of really led the charge. And I always try to kind of find those people, those respected kind of change agents inside of, the contractors that I worked with.
Totally. Okay, cool. Well, and even just a little, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of these topics, but just kind of a little bit of a sidestep. And this is where your bias could come through, which I'm all for. But even over your 25 years of experience, right, working in the construction tech industry for that duration, what do you think is the most important workflow for contractors to look at to automate, or maybe the highest yielding workflow for them to automate?
I think
it's a big question. It's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different mission critical kind of workflows on a project. But I think a lot of it is like lessons learned. Like people don't, they do lots of projects. They get a lot of energy to kind of kick off a project, but they have less around the handover, looking at the lessons learned. Like let's get really into our data and what can we learn from our data for the next project. I think a lot of that is still kind of some of the administrative kind of processes that are still, a lot of multi-touches and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think we really need to be a data-driven kind of industry, and what data we have, what kind of decisions can we make from that data? Can we use agents? Can we use anything to help us kind of make better kind of project decisions? Either that's the current data set we have or the historical data set that we have, and how can we be more efficient? How can we learn from our past projects? I don't think we've really done that. A lot of some people are kind of talking about that, but I don't think we've really done that on a holistic kind of perspective for the industry.
Totally. Why not? Like, where do you see the biggest bottleneck there, or what's prevented us from doing it? Is it just pure technology, or what do you think?
I think there's no. I don't think it's purely technology. I think it's the project nature of construction that
Totally.
we're on to the next project. We got to kick this project off. We don't want delays. We don't want So I think there's a nature of the urgency of a project, and then I think we've had kind of really disconnected data. Like we have data from accounting systems, we have BIM data, we have project data, we have safety data. We've kind of had these disconnected silos of point solutions, and so we need to find ways of kind of pulling all that data together to make good decisions.
Totally. Well, and I mean, we hear that all the time, but I mean, you hear these products. We'll just use Procore as the example, right? Like the big publicly traded company, right? It's like it's supposed to be the all-in-one product, right? Like the idea behind that, and a lot of consumers buy that product because they can see the vision, right? Like
Right.
they experience and feel the disjointedness, but then they get into these big solutions. Like, do you think that the point solution is totally necessary considering the nuance and variability in construction? Or like, do you think there is room to build a legitimately satisfying all-in-one product?
It's such a hard question.
That's why we're talking about it.
And people have been talking about, the point solutions versus, best of breed versus the platform for a
Yeah.
long time. My take is that I think you need some fundamental foundation tools, and I would say Procore is one of those kind of foundation kind of tools, or competitors to Procore.
Yeah.
And then I think it's getting easier with AI and with integration. So before it was really disconnected. Now we kind of can pull that data together. We can have APIs. So I think it's a combination of your really great point solutions with a few kind of fundamental kind of tools. I'm not sure that that's the answer, but that's the best that I've come up with.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we're just saying that like the need for a point solution, or we could even call it like the product that's going to be best in breed, right? Like this is like totally focused on one workflow or one component of the business, one line of business. There's still like a massive need for that. But the other side of this, and I'd be curious your take on, is like in construction, there's just the inevitable context or data that happens on the day to day that just gets missed. And the only way to track it is to get someone into a piece of software to update it in a meaningful way. Right. So what's your take on that? Like the conversations that happen the side, or the superintendent project manager that's there on a Sunday, just, getting stuff done that they didn't during the week, and then going out on the job project and evaluating and catching things. How do you see technology being able to augment and bring that data together?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like we talked about, is kind of unstructured data. So how do you, some of that's guys having a conversation. Like that's data, that's information.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we capture, there's probably great insights there, great information. We don't really capture that. I mean, I guess there's, we can look at ways of using voice and capturing meeting notes and some of those things to capture some of that. But I think and I think the bigger companies are investing in, one of the things that Speckle does well is it partners with a lot of the kind of big data lake kind of solutions, and we take that kind of data and bring it into the data lake and Databricks and things like that. So I think companies are starting to look at how they can kind of consolidate all these different data types into one source, and then be able to kind of bring insights and ask questions, be able to get insights and ask questions on that data about past projects, but also kind of predictive around what's going to happen on my current or my future projects.
Totally. Well, and talk a little bit about, and this is where you can like shamelessly discuss Speckle, because I'm curious. I hadn't heard of Speckle yet, but like, do you have like what you talk BIM data? Give us like the high level. Like, what is it doing, and what are you the most excited about? Where do you see it driving the most value?
I just it's really exciting is how some of their big customers are using Speckle. And within kind of BIM, you have different flavors of BIM, and you get models.
What are the different flavors? I'm not a big BIM guy. I should be.
You have different design tools. You'll have Revit or you'll have Navisworks, or all these kind of different Bentley systems, and you'll have all these kind of different kind of BIM tools, and you'll get BIM models from different subcontractors and different designers. And so how do you kind of QA and QC that data, but then look at that, how can you take that across all of your portfolio, and how can you really get good insights out of all that BIM data? And what equipment do we need for the next, we talked to a large really retailer yesterday, and they're designing 600 outlets, and what equipment do we need to order now so that it can be delivered, or what formats are working best? And you can start to ask kind of your BIM data, and I think there's a lot of intelligence sitting in BIM that is just unused.
Totally. Okay. Well, and so even just like bring this back, and like Speckle might not like solve some of the labor shortage, but even just how you're explaining it, I hear like more like administrative office labor type work becoming much more efficient. But where do you see a product like Speckle helping impact the need for this many, 500,000 new people to join the industry, or does it?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, we need more VDC managers. We need to bring design and construction together, tighter. I mean, there's, a lot more design build projects than there were in the past. And, one of the big trends I see is technology getting earlier in the cycles, and construction companies getting earlier in the cycles. And we're seeing a lot of investment in kind of pre-construction. Yep. And BIM and Speckle play in that world as well. So, Speckle could play across the whole kind of project lifecycle, even the digital twin and handover and all those kinds of things. So I see a big trend, though, where people are trying to solve problems by using this data, trying to solve problems before they become bigger problems out in the field. So I think that's one thing that's really interesting about AI and predictive analytics and using the data efficiently is, can we kind of find problems before we start, getting out the shovels and the bulldozers and things like that.
Totally. And that's a hell of a point. I love that point, because now when you're looking at like, okay, we need 500,000 jobs, right? But that's 500,000 jobs effectively based on how we've historically done things, right? Like we need 500,000 people to do the work as per defined what it was before. Now, when we look at solutions like a Speckle or an adaptive or insert whatever AI native solution, right? Because we're forward thinking, we might not need those bodies, because historically so many of those bodies were picking up the slack from poor planning, from missed data, from disjointed data, and now they're having to fill this void. So that actually would be an interesting one. You've heard it here first on Builders, Budgets, and Beers. Do we even need the 500,000, or is it closer to 300,000? Or like, what does that actually do to impact an industry?
Yeah, and do we need a different type of person going forward?
Yeah,
we need different skill sets. Do we need to change our education so we get people that are ready to be in a tech-enabled kind of construction company? Do the trade unions have to change?
Totally.
Is there a merge of trade school and university? Like,
totally.
They don't have to be. They're so kind of mutual exclusive, and I see where there could be hybrids of you take some construction management courses and you take some trade skill courses, and that kind of gives you prepared for your career out in the construction industry. So I think that's a bigger thing that the whole industry needs to kind of think through, and education, development of people, the short. To help solve that kind of shortage of problem. But I think that's a bigger, I think there's a lot of lip service to that, but I don't know if we're actually doing a lot to kind of think about what the new construction professional looks like in the future, and how do we find more of those people.
Totally. And this was great. I mean, because this kind of brought up full circle for me, because again, I think when you're talking to contractors and they're like, hey, AI is coming, we know we need to adopt it, but we're like trying to figure out how to meaningfully apply it to our business. And then when they're thinking like big picture, they're like, okay, great, I can make my office team as efficient as humanly possible, but I still need electricians, right? I still need people to do the work. I think this is a really good way to like understand and explain how making a tighter office team, whether that's on the BIM side or again the accounting side, to get the data that you need to make better decisions to prevent people from doing the work that they really don't like to do. I mean,
Right.
and that goes back into like even the guys in the field is like how many subcontractors are frustrated when they show up to a job and what they need isn't there, what the trade before them wasn't actually complete. Now they're at a hiatus. Now that's pushing schedules, right? That's getting heartburn on the project managers, right? And then the estimators are like, we estimated this, but we're way off. And it's like this whole big issue of people doing things that they don't really want to do, but that's creating a 60-hour work week for them or whatever it is, right? That's where you can start to think about AI on a little bit larger horizon, or even robotics for that matter, right? Of like, okay, great. Like, if we can tighten up these operations and we can get better clarity into our data, we can prevent these types of hiccups that we're traditionally seeing. And that's going to prevent us from needing to hire this many people. We can make our team more efficient. We can look at different roles that we might need that's going to impact the business on a different level. Excuse me. So yeah, that was super meaningful. I mean, Dex, before we wrap up here, I mean, is there any like closing thought or summary that you have for the fine contractors of America?
No, I mean, I think it was a really, interesting conversation, and I really love being part of it. But I also think it's, we talked about some of the negative stuff. I think it's really exciting. Like we have a chance to redesign the industry that builds America. Like we
Totally.
can have a different lens on how we kind of build things, and we can build better, faster, safer ways. And I think it's really exciting. And I've seen it across the last 25 years, and I'm even more excited about what could happen across the next 25 years.
Totally. Yeah. And I think in turn, like, yeah, good call out on like from the negative side of things. But I think, even with your mention of like, how does education and like the future of this generation look like is like, we're on the cusp of, to your point, redesigning what this entire process looks like and how AI is going to fit into it. But I think with that said, Dex, I really appreciate you jumping on, dude.
No, it
And,
was
I love it. So from here, if people want to follow you along, if they want to learn more from you, how do they find you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me, and Dexter Bachelder. And I mean, I've made so many close friendships with the companies I've worked with, my clients. Construction's global, so I've been on project sites in Latin America, the Middle East, China, and that's another great part of our industry is that just the ability to make relationships and on a kind of global basis. So I'd love to talk to anybody.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely connect with Dex. He's got a lot of really good lot of good content on LinkedIn. But cool. Well, I appreciate you, sir. And yeah, we'll have to make coffee or beers happen sometime since we're both
Cheers.
in
Sounds good.
Boston. I love it. I love it. Cool,
Well,
Dex. Well,
good afternoon.
yep, you too. Thanks for jumping on.